The mystery and allure of a woodland garden, coming up. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. You know, as a garden designer, I learned a long time ago that by adding just a touch of mystery to the design of a garden, you can really enhance it. And I think woodland gardens have their own special quality when it comes to the unknown. Just think about what a winding path or a trickling stream or even lush foliage can do to a garden. That's why in today's show I want to focus on woodland gardens, and hopefully you'll come away with some ideas that you can add to your garden home. We'll visit America's oldest national park, where a woodland garden has become a key attraction. I'll show you some of the plants that I use in my own shady path. Plus, I've got a fun craft project that'll bring toads to your garden. That's right, toads. It's a great project for kids, and it takes advantage of broken terracotta pots, which I'm sure you have a few of these around. But first, Garvin Woodland Gardens. I'll take you there right after the break. This is Hot Springs National Park, Arkansas, the Spa City as they sometimes call it, where they've been using the healing power of the naturally occurring hot waters that come from deep underground for centuries. Not far from the rising vapors of downtown Hot Springs is another hidden treasure, Garvin Woodland Gardens. Garvin Gardens covers about 210 acres of a forested peninsula that juts into Lake Hamilton. The gardens showcase floral landscapes, free-flowing streams and waterfalls, as well as breathtaking architectural structures in natural woodland settings. The gardens are named in honor of Verna Garvin, whose father purchased the property for its timber in 1920. But the timber was never cut here because Ms. Garvin felt compelled to preserve the beauty of this unspoiled place. Her wish was that this land provide an environment where visitors could find tranquility, inspiration, and a better understanding of the world around them.
This was the work of David Slauson, who's a Japanese garden designer from Cleveland, Ohio. Behind me now you're looking at one of the upland cascades which David was working on to create the idea of representing the character of each type of waterfall that you might find here in Arkansas. In the course of building this garden, in about 18 months, we placed 3.5 million pounds of stone in here. So the idea was to create these little focal points of stone all through the garden that play off the plant materials, so you get the two working against each other to create the kind of interest that we're enjoying here. And we're at a very important point in this garden that's called the vista point in the Chinese tradition. And the idea is that you explore each of these little spaces as you get to this point, but this is the point where you see them all revealed together and you understand the relationships of how they all relate to each other a little better. There's about 150 different species of plants in here that have been introduced as part of the collection, and we're always fine-tuning and refining those things. And some of them were experiments that didn't work, but a famous gardener told me once, if you've never lost a plant, you're not a gardener.
We're going to get more into plants for woodland gardens in just a bit. In fact, we're going to talk about the importance of green in the landscape. I'll also want to touch on the father of American landscape architecture. That's all coming up, so stay with us. In order to explore this idea of mystery a bit further, I wanted to bring you to this place. It's a garden that I helped to create several years ago. It's a special place to me because here I was allowed to use the principle of mystery in a bold way. So why don't you come into the garden and let me show you around. This garden is made up of a few simple elements. Now, the elements I used here are a series of tall vertical boulders along with a few plants, just some ferns, moss, and hosta. Perfect additions to a shade garden. I wanted a bold feature in the garden, but one that at the same time was harmonious with the woodland landscape beyond and the contemporary architecture of the home. And these stones serve that purpose. It was really quite a feat to get them in here. You see, each one of these weighs close to a ton. Not only do these stones evoke a certain sense of mystery, but also a sense of great age. They actually came out of an ancient dry riverbed. You can see the moss and lichens on them just add to the whole ambience. What I really like about this arrangement of stones is that they serve as a focal point from the house to the garden. So from your perspective, these stones arrest your attention as a visitor walking up to the front door. The other aspect of this arrangement of stones that I find so appealing is the fact that it creates a certain rhythm in this space. One stone placed after another creates a certain cadence. Now, it's important to realize when creating rhythm in a space that the negative space between the objects is as important as the objects themselves. Now, there's one other aspect of this garden I want to point out. It's the idea of the crescent or the curve and how that can create a sense of mystery. You see, when we laid out this terrace, we laid it out on a slight curve like this, and then placed the stones in a similar fashion following that same line, placing a path here between the terrace and the stones. Now what this does is it doesn't allow you to see what's beyond on the other side, further enhancing the sense of mystery in this garden. So as we've seen, a few bold elements can produce dramatic results. Notice anything about the simple plant palette in this mysterious garden? Green, green, and more green. You see, mixes of ferns, hostas, and mosses are the base for this garden. Let's take a look at some plants that are primarily green that look at home among a shady path. Some of my favorites include Solomon seal, Arbovita fern, Lenten rose, Chinese ginger, and hardy cyclamen, as well as liriope. And for a touch of the exotic, you could use a wide range of elephant ears. Shifting gears a bit, garden design, just like fashion, architecture, and other art forms, goes through phases or fads. One year, everyone might be wild about bright colors and planting with abundance. And not long after, the trend might change to pastels and very simple small gardens. One of the best ways to learn anything is to take a hands-on approach, and that's exactly what I did when I studied garden history and design in England. You know, I wanted to study these landscapes firsthand, so I set out and saw scores of them. The gorgeous herbaceous borders at Arley Hall. At Chatsworth House, I saw 3 centuries of garden design, and at Chumley, well, the picturesque views are world-class. Now, these are just a few examples, but I think you get the idea. So it was in England I began to see throughout these great estates that there were certain elements that they all had in common. For instance, many of the gardens were laid out around the home, like rooms that extended out from the house. All of these rooms had enclosures, entries, focal points, abundant plantings, and color schemes. I began keeping track of many of the ideas that were used in gardens from generation to generation. I also became interested in the personalities behind these gardens and how they had influenced the history of Western landscape design. Now, one of these guys was an Englishman by the name of Capability Brown. Now, Capability wasn't his real name, that was his nickname. He got this nickname by going around properties and saying, "Your property has great capabilities." Brown's style centered around great sweeping landscapes, like this one he designed, the park at Chatsworth. The English landscape garden under Capability Brown was a place of wide green lawns, bodies of water, and clumps of trees, all planted with the utmost care to give the impression of a romantic natural scene. Picturesque vistas, like this bridge leading up to Chatsworth House, were meticulously contrived to give these landscapes a sense of natural beauty. Though, of course, nothing in the garden was natural at all. It was all very carefully planned. Some have criticized Brown for completely destroying the works of previous generations of garden designers in order to install his pastoral landscapes. You see, he would sweep away the past entirely and bring in his new style of garden for the current generation. Here in America, we had our gardening forefathers as well. Believe it or not, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were extremely interested in garden design. Their homes, like Washington's Mount Vernon, certainly reflected a passion for the art of the garden, but their style was directly influenced by European design. By the second half of the 19th century, A man now known as the father of American landscape architecture, Frederick Law Olmsted, was making his mark on the American scene. He was taking European principles and applying them to a variety of gardens along the East Coast. During a visit to one of Olmsted's best-known designs, the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina, I had a chance to learn more about this great designer from Bill Alexander.
Olmsted was a man who was ready to rise to any challenge dealing with the land, beginning, as you know, with his very first project many years before that time in Central Park in New York. He'd transformed that rather rough, rocky piece of ground into the wonderful park that people of New York have enjoyed through all the years since. So Olmsted was really the natural to make this property the wonderful, productive, working estate that it is today. From the time that Olmsted was a young lad growing up in the rural countryside near Hartford, Connecticut, his father used to take him on long rides throughout the countryside, and he developed at a very early age an appreciation for natural scenery, you know, the beautiful countryside. And he believed that the natural landscape had a really wonderful effect on people.
We'll look at some of the plants that make up my shade garden after this. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Welcome back. We've been taking a look at woodland gardens because they can be both mysterious and alluring. Earlier we saw Garvin Woodland Gardens in Hot Springs, Arkansas, a beautiful lakeside garden that's developing a reputation as a quiet retreat just minutes from the nation's first national park. We also took a look at plants in the green color family. Everything from hostas, ferns, and mosses to those big, luxurious tropical elephant ears. And who can forget this guy? Frederick Law Olmsted, the father of American landscape architecture. His naturalistic landscapes have had a huge influence on this country. Now, I promised you a look at some of the plants that I use in my shade garden, so let's start with some of the basics. Now, what makes this shade garden is this large oak tree that acts as an umbrella to this part of the garden. Now, some of the large shrubs I've planted include hydrangeas, rhododendron, Leyland cypress, Chinese witch hazel, and along the fence I've planted hollies to help screen the views. Now, to fill in, I've added hostas, Solomon seal, columbine, heuchera, foxglove, ladybells, and all ways to bring a splash of color, some of those impatiens. Now, all of these plants blend together beautifully and provide me with a woodland garden that's an inviting oasis from the heat of summer. As many of you know, I'm a garden designer, and when I lay out a garden, I always fall back on some basic principles of design. It just makes the whole design process much simpler and easier for me. Which brings me to today's viewer mail. It comes from Mary in Sunland, California, and she writes, "What are the 11 principles of gardening I heard you mention on one of your shows?" Well, Mary, I get this question quite a bit. Actually, there are 12 principles of design that I use when I create a garden. First, I think every garden should start with a good framework or structure. These can be man-made or natural. Next, I like to lay out gardens I design into garden rooms, so I make it a point to enclose space, giving each garden room a wall or border. Moving on to the third principle of design, I want to frame good views and screen out the bad ones. Now, the next principle of design is accenting entries. You see, nothing says welcome quite like certain plants. I also think it's really important to create a sense of mystery in the garden. An easy way to do this is to have a curved path that doesn't reveal its ending. Okay, now let's talk about the importance of shape and form. When you look at plants, look at their basic shapes. Then see how those shapes interplay with one another. Mary, I have to say that one of my favorite principles of design is whimsy. We can't forget to have a little fun in the garden. There's no question that color is one of the most powerful tools we have as designers. Just remember that hot and fiery colors excite us and stimulate the imagination, whereas soft, cool pastel colors calm us and make us feel more harmonious. Now, another principle that runs close on the heels of color in terms of importance is pattern, texture, and rhythm. You see, we should pay attention to the textural qualities of leaves. You can create patterns in the garden, such as alternating checkerboards made of boxwoods. To create rhythm, just place 3 or more items in a row. The 10th principle of design is all about abundance. You can see from these images how much of an impact a generous planting can have on a space. Now, every garden needs a focal point. Look for objects or plants that interest you and place them prominently. Last but certainly not least, we have to consider time. For instance, you probably don't want your garden to feel brand new, even if it is. Well, there you have it, Mary, all 12 principles of design. Now, if you have questions like Mary's, you can just go to my website. I answer them in my weekly newsletter. That's pallensmith.com. Whimsical toad houses you can make for your garden home right after this. Now, in today's show, we've been focused on woodland gardens, but I'm sure you've been wondering why I have all this broken terracotta piled up here on the table. Well, I love using these shards of clay pots to create toad houses. I know that a toad has a face that only a mother could love, but did you know that one toad can eat from 10 to 20,000 insects in a year? And when you consider they can live for 4 to 15 years, you have to take housing toads seriously. Think about it, that's a lot of insect control. The simplest way to create a toad house is just to take a broken piece of terracotta like this and bury it halfway in the soil. This makes a little shelter for the toad to live in. And if you get kids involved, you can have a lot of fun painting them. Well, that's it for today's show. I hope you've been inspired by some of the places we've visited and some of the plants we've seen. And if you have a shady area, I hope you'll turn it into a beautiful little woodland garden. Until next time, get out there and grow something. From the garden, I'm Alan Smith.
In this garden I dream of a bed of flowers. Bluebirds sing of the beauty all around us. And every time the sun comes out, I can't help but smile. Oh, no, I can't help but smile.